For some time now, it seems that many have used the argument of separation of church and state to attempt to get every resemblance or semblance of God or any symbol of God or any expression of God out of anything that would be deemed government, to include schools, any government-owned building, any entity at all. And so this has really come pretty far, and it is worthy of debate, and it's worthy of consideration. So today I seek to give some thoughts in reference to what I believe to be the original intent of the thought of separation of church and state. There are some news articles that I think would be of interest. This particular news article is in reference to the football coach that prayed on a field, and since it was a public school, there was a case lodged against him, and his job was at risk and all of that. But anyway, the Supreme Court actually ruled on that. And this article here says the Supreme Court further erodes separation between church and state in case of praying football coach. The article says the Supreme Court said Monday that a Washington state school district violated the First Amendment rights of high school football coach when he lost his job after praying at the 50-yard line after games. The opinion was 6-3 along conservative liberal ideological lines. The Constitution and the best of our traditions counsel mutual respect and tolerance, not censorship and suppression for religious and non-religious views alike, said Justice Neil Gorsuch. And then also, it says here, the court said Coach Joe Kennedy's prayers amounted to private speech protected by the First Amendment and could not be restricted by the school district. He simply went to pray. He did not demand that any other students prayed. He didn't use his position to force any religion upon another. He just simply knelt and prayed. The decision, this article says, lowers the bar between church and state in an opinion that will allow more religious expression in public spaces. The court clarified that a government entity does not necessarily violate the Establishment Clause by permitting religious expression in schools. And so basically what's being stated here is the Supreme Court found that it's okay for someone to actually express their religious views and even pray in public settings if they so feel to do so. It says, we are aware of no historically sound understanding of the Establishment Clause that begins to make it necessary for government to be hostile to religion in this way, Gorsuch wrote. And then it goes on to say the Establishment Clause of the Constitution says Congress can make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereby. And so that's a good article, but you see how the fight is taking it to the place that people are wanting every aspect of religion held not through an organization but through an individual, for that expression to be totally suppressed. The Supreme Court here in this article by Bloomberg says the Supreme Court unseparates church and state. It says the justices have effectively ended the century-old constitutional ban on direct state aid for the teaching of religion. The framers would be dumbfounded. It's an interesting article, but basically what's going on here is they're trying to assert that separation of church and state is a constitutional ban. It's not. It's not found. That phrase is not found in the Constitution. And it says the framers will be dumbfounded. I beg to differ. The framers actually were very religious men, and they were free to express their religion even in a government setting. There is a reason for that wall of separation, as some have called it, even some way on, but it wasn't a constitutional ban on there being any expression of religion or God found within government. Now, here's another article. It says the Supreme Court strikes another blow against church-state separation. And it says here in this article, as observers tensely awaited potential landmark decisions on abortion and guns, on Tuesday, the conservative majority of the U.S. Supreme Court took a big step on another contentious subject in a 6-3 decision. The court expanded its new doctrine that ensuring the constitutional free exercise of religion is more important than policing the document's prohibition on establishment of religion. It says in Carson and Macon, Chief Justice John Roberts, backed by the other 5 members of the court's conservative bloc, held that a main program providing subsidies for private schools acting as public schools, be like a charter school, in remote areas of the state could not exclude religious schools as recipients of the funds. And so basically their different ones were trying to keep these funds from being utilized in schools that were gaining public funds, but were really a public type setting of a school, to where funds from individuals could be ported there for the education of their children. There is this move that some are trying to say that even in a situation like that no religious teaching can take place. But the reality is that, how do we define religion? Is it only the religion that would use the Bible as its rule book? Or are we going to use that even on humanism as a religion, or as any other religion? And if we're going to say that anything done religiously can't actually be taught in a school, that's going to limit that quite a bit. But this is very interesting, and things are really coming to a head in this area. And I think that definitely they should come to a head, and this should be discussed. Now, the root of separation of church and state, man, it goes way back, because at the founding of our nation, we were really a colony of England. And England did have a church that was a state church, and so the Congregational Anglican type church was actually here in our state would receive funding and everything else from individuals to pay their clergy. And not only that, they instituted all kinds of things that would require the people here to baptize their children, to attend church. There was a lot of law that was created that said that the common citizen had to be engaged in religious ceremony activity. And that should not be the case. Religion should be absolutely based on one's own conscience. But here in this article, it says separation of church and state, a metaphor rooted in early American fear of government involvement. Roger Williams, founder of Rhode Island, he, John Clark, others were very, very instrumental in the founding of this state, coming through the Revolutionary War, all that. It says here was the first public official to use this metaphor. He opined that an authentic Christian church would be possible only if there was a wall or hedge of separation between the wilderness of the world and the garden of the church. Williams believed that any government involved in the church would corrupt the church. Absolutely. The government should not be involved in the church, and directly as an institution, the church should not be involved in government. That's true. But people that work within a government structure are invited to participate in the church, and people that are involved in churches individually should also be involved, should be allowed to be involved in government as well. The most famous use of the metaphor, talking about this metaphor in reference to the wall or hedge of separation, was used by Thomas Jefferson in 1802 in a letter to the Danbury Baptist Association. In it, Jefferson declared that when the American people adopted the Establishment Clause, they built a wall of separation between the church and state. Jefferson had earlier witnessed the turmoil of the American colonists as they struggled to combine governance with religious expression. And the Baptists and some other religious groups were heavily involved in ensuring that when the United States of America came to be, that there would be some protections so that we didn't become just like England and all the problems that existed there, in reference to the battle that took place in this power struggle of government officials trying to use religion as a hammer, and the church using government as a hammer to punish people and to force compulsory service and participation in religious ceremony. It says some colonies experimented with religious freedom, while others strongly supported an established church. So Rhode Island became what was called from the charter there from King Charles. It was called an experiment, a lively experiment to see what would a colony be like if we gave true liberty in the matters of conscience, so that we can actually serve the Lord and be a part of government based on our own dictates of our conscience. This was a new thing, and truly was an experiment that then would spill over and be a part of the founding of our great country. Here in this, we find Jefferson fought to disestablish Anglican Church in Virginia colony. He understood this, and he saw that there needed to be a separation in reference to they're two separate entities. Again, not meaning they can't be involved as far as citizens in both, but meaning that the entities themselves should not be yoked up. In this, it says, one of the decisive battles for the disestablishment was Jefferson's colony of Virginia, where the Anglican Church had long been the established church. Both Jefferson and fellow Virginian James Madison felt the state's support for a particular religion or for any religion was improper. They argued that compelling citizens to support through taxation a faith they did not follow violated their natural right to religious liberty. Now, so if today the thought was that we were going to tax people and take those taxes and use those to support any particular religion in reference to a church, that would absolutely be wrong. And I think if that was to be brought forth, we should stand totally against that. But that is not what's at stake today. It says the two were aided in their fight for disestablishment by the Baptists, Presbyterians, Quakers, and others dissenting faiths of Anglican Virginia. During the debates surrounding both its writing and ratification, many religious groups feared that the Constitution offered an insufficient guarantee of the civil and religious rights of citizens. Again, noting the separation of the two, civil and religious rights of its citizens. To help win ratification, Madison proposed a Bill of Rights that would include religious liberty. As presidents, both Jefferson and Madison could be accused of mixing religion and government. Madison issued a proclamations of religious fastings and Thanksgiving, while Jefferson signed treaties that sent religious ministers to the Native Americans. And after its inception, the Supreme Court has opened each of its sessions with cry, God save the United States and this honorable court. And none of that was ever seen as a problem or a mixing incorrectly of these two in reference to what the early colonists actually feared in following what was happening over in England. And here now we have a culture war absolutely raging in our country. There's a lot here, but this article here on separation of church and state says our nation's capital has many indicators of our country's religious heritage. Indeed, a host of references to God, Christ, and the Bible literally riddle the monuments in government buildings. The writings of the founding fathers are also filled with their belief in what they called true religion, referring to Christianity. They believed in the God of the Bible to the exclusion of all others, and they believed that atheism was foolish thinking. Now, this was absolutely true, but our government was set up in such a way that they can hold those beliefs and yet not violate in anything founded within the Constitution or the mixing of these two entities, the government and the church. It says, but if these statements are true and abundant evidence exists to prove them, Why do so many claim that the Founding Fathers and the Constitution require separation of church and state? Why do courts, judges, and politicians say that there should be no crosses or Bibles or other Christian objects in public schools, government buildings, or public parks? Did those who actually wrote the Constitution agree with them? Did the founders believe that public expression of Christianity should not be allowed? In the 1947 U.S. Supreme Court case, Everson v. Board of Education, the High Court declared, the First Amendment has erected a wall between church and state. This wall must be kept high and impregnable. We could not approve the slightest breach. The court clearly understood the wall metaphor to refer to expunging all references to God, the Bible, and Christianity from public life. But where did they get such an idea? After all, the phrase separation of church and state is not even found in the U.S. Constitution or any other government document. Indeed, the late U.S. Supreme Court Chief Justice William Rehnquist labeled the phrase a misleading metaphor and noted, the wall of separation between church and state is a metaphor based on bad history, a metaphor which has proven useless as a guide to judging. It should be frankly and explicitly abandoned. The phrase was appropriated from a private letter addressed to the Danbury Baptist Association by Thomas Jefferson while he was president, a quarter of a century after the founding, and it read in part, believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, that he owes account to none other for his faith or his worship, that the legitimate powers of government reach actions only and not opinions. I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people which declared that their legislators should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state. Adhering to this expression of the supreme will of the nation in behalf of the rights of conscience, I shall see with sincere satisfaction the progress of those sentiments which tend to restore to man all his natural rights, convinced he has no natural rights in opposition to his social duties. And so again, these natural rights spoken of are rights given to us by God. They are inalienable. No one can take them away. The federal government does not give us or grant us rights. God grants us rights. That's how our nation was set up. And the government is sent to protect those rights, but they do not grant us nor issue us rights. That comes from God. This goes on to say, what did Jefferson mean by a wall of separation between church and state? Did he mean that we must keep God and the Bible out of the public life? Or did he mean that we must keep government from interfering with public practice of Christianity or religion in general? In their efforts to restrain the federal government from overstepping its boundaries and wielding illicit power, the founders appended the Bill of Rights. Their stated intention was to further ensure that the federal government did not interfere with the foundational rights given by God to each citizen. The First Amendment reads, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. A careful consideration of the discussions that transpired among the founders in their effort to achieve the proper wording yields two conclusions. One, by establishment of religion, they meant that no Protestant denomination was to be elevated above the other sects and establishments as the state religion. I'd say not just Protestant, but any religion. Number two, by prohibiting the free exercise thereby, they meant that the federal government was not to interfere with the free and public practice of the Christian religion, or any religion for that matter. Several historical facts verify these conclusions. For example, the founder who has who has gone down in history as the father of the Bill of Rights, was George Mason, himself a delegate to the Constitutional Convention. He was heavily involved in civil government. His proposed wording for the First Amendment enabled us to grasp the historic context in which the founders were attempting to frame the the amendment's intentions. All men have an equal, natural, and unalienable right to the free exercise of religion according to the dictates of their conscience, and that no particular sect or society of Christians ought to be favored or established by law in preference to others. A wall to which Jefferson referred was the fact that no power was given by the Constitution to Congress to establish a national church and to compel by law the worship rituals of any particular denomination. His own practices demonstrated that the courts have misapplied Jefferson's phrase. Very, very interesting. But there's a culture war. And what's interesting is that if we take and we make religion solely Christianity, then we're not going to label humanism a religion, but it is. Even the thought oftentimes of some of the more liberal stances in reference to climate change and other, we can call it science all we want, but it's become a religion. It seems as if they worship these certain things, and they've stopped even considering the science in particular, or at least an opportunity to debate what these things are. They follow it and force people to comply with their demands. And this is really what our founding fathers was attempting to keep from happening. So what was the reason for the separation of church and state? Well, there's basically, by God, there's three main realms of authority under God. Now, we can find a couple other realms, but these are the three main realms that in the Bible are given rule. The family is given rule. Just one verse to kind of show this in 1 Timothy. In reference to a pastor, it says, "One that ruleth well his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity. For if a man know not how to rule his own house, how shall he take care of the church of God?" Now, it's not just pastors that rule their own house. If a person is going to be one who would be, in a sense, eligible for a role in a church in a pastoral capacity, one of the qualifications will be that he first ruled his own house. And this is something that all families should be engaged in. We as parents need to rule our own house, as fathers ruling our house, as children being in subjection to that rule. So family has rule given to it by God. Government also has rule given to it by God. Romans 13 says, "For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is a minister of God to thee for good." Police officers, government in general, is supposed to keep the rule of the civil society held in check. And when evil becomes rampant, or evil steals or tries to kill or to impede others from their being able to exercise their lives based on the rights God gave, then government should step in absolutely and set that right. It says, "But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain." Truly, the government's been given a sword. Police carry guns. There's the death penalty. There's the court systems. There's prisons. There's jails. This is the sword. "They beareth not the sword in vain, for he is the minister of God." The Bible says that the government official is to be the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Families given rule, government's given rule, and of course, church is given rule. 1 Timothy 5:17, "Let the elders that rule well be counted worthy of double honor, especially they who labor in word and doctrine." So in a church setting, within a church, the structure of a church, there's rule. There's rules, and there's those given the rule to keep the order. Also, we find rule there in the church. Now, these three entities that we see here, They all and we all cohabitate in society, but we are not to impose our rule in the other entity. The rule of the church should not be imposed in the rule of government, nor in the rule of the family. And so the rule of the government should not be imposed in the rule of the family, nor the rule of the church, and on and on and on. These will have some spillover in the sense of citizens who they're part of families, they're part of the civil government, and they're part of churches. There'll be some spillover in reference to them, but the organization itself should not mix. They should not mix. The rules should not mix. They should remain separate. There should be walls of separation built up such that they do not and they do not spill over into the other. So we're going to look at how do these then coexist? How should they coexist in society? So how should these coexist, these three entities in society? Well, the First Amendment says, it's the Establishment Clause, and it says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereby or thereof. Keep in mind, what was the purpose of government? The purpose of government is to protect life, liberty, and happiness. It started off as life, liberty, and property, and then, of course, morphed over into happiness. So the federal government, government in the Bible, we will go all the way back, and we'll see it described as a beast and how it requires to be chained. Government is powerful, and so I guess the question is government over the church? Is government over the family? Should government be over every other institution? Because that's not how the framers actually set up our country. It's just like in government, we have co-equal branches. We'll have a legislative branch, we have an executive branch, we have a judicial branch. The judicial is not supposed to be the most powerful one over the other two. They're supposed to be co-equal. They keep each other in balance. Same thing's true in society. The family, the church, the government are co-equal, and they're supposed to keep each in check. Not having rule over the other, but also not being under the rule of another. And so this is very important. So what happened is that the early settlers and the founders of our country, they came out of England, and the government was over everything. There was a king, and he was over every aspect of life, and nobody had any rights unless the king granted them rights. And so the United States of America, which by the way is 50 separate states that operate, supposed to be as countries, right? A state overseas is known as a country. We're all states. We have our own power in our states. And so the united aspect of that was to bring all 50 together for some common things, like for the protection of all 50. So the military came into play, and for commerce and trading. There's some reasons why they would come together. But it was not so that we would be one like a country is one. No, we're to operate really as 50 independent countries, though together on some areas. Now, the First Amendment was established so that Congress, the federal government, would not be allowed to make a law establishing any religion, not a Christian religion, not Catholicism. That could not be established. By the way, not Islam can't be established as a country as our religion across the states, as is anything else. By the way, humanism cannot be established. It cannot be established as a religion. At least it should not be. Or the prohibiting of the free exercise thereof. In other words, whatever you believe as an individual, you have right to practice that belief so long as your practicing of that belief does not impede others or cause others' rights to be violated. If in your religion you believe that you have the command to kill, well, that would be violating someone else's right, and that's not going to work. Government will step in and they will try you on that, find you guilty, put you in jail, or execute you. That's what Romans 13 says the government was given to do. You can't take your property, your vehicle, and run it into someone else's house. You've taken a liberty that's not yours to take. You violated someone else's right. Government can step in, they adjudicate that, they make that right. That's the purpose of government. Religion, say a church. By the way, a church is an individual local church. Church was never meant to be as a whole, like one big thing. It's supposed to be small individual churches. That's how it was set up by God and the Word of God. And so a church should not be allowed to be over the government or over a family to where the church can then force its will on either entity. A church has no power in a family. A church has no power in the government. There's no rule there and shouldn't have that power. And so a church can't make rule that way. The legislator's made up of people. Now those people may be part of a particular sect of religion. But even with that, their ideals are going to be debated amongst that, and we're going to get a good framework there. They can bring those ideals in, but it can't be with the authority of the church. They're just a citizen that's now part of government, and they're going to work through that together. This is how our country was set up. So, point number one to this. Government is not the ruling agency over all others. They are one of three and must remain in balance. This is how our government was set up. Point number two, the wall of separation that Williams and Jefferson and others spoke of, Leland, Mason, this wall of separation was to keep government out of the religion business. It was not to keep the beliefs and ideals of citizens out of government. That is not the case. If all those that attended churches and had deeply held religious conviction could not be part of government, there would have been no government in the founding of our country, because pretty much everyone held sincerely held religious beliefs. And so that was not the case. It never has been the case, and that's not the case today. Point number three, God is not just the God of the church. He is over the church, the family, and government. God is not a product of the church. He is the creator of all three and all things. Hence, he is to be a part of all things. Today, it seems like people try to take God and put him in a box and put that box in a church building and say, stay there. But you can't do that with God. You see, because God is the creator. He created everything. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. God is the creator of heaven and earth. He is the creator of mankind. He is the creator of government. In Genesis 9, he established government. He is the creator of the family. He performed the first marriage of Adam and Eve. He gave us the pattern on how a man would leave father and mother, cleave to his own wife, and they would become a new family. He gave us all these concepts. And so he also gave us the concept on how all three of these would exist. But he's not just God in the church. He is God in government, and he is God in family. And the framers of our Constitution and the early founders of our country understood this. So to say that somehow we are going to take God, put him in a box, put him in the church house, and you can't do that. Because God is not just the God of the church. He is over all. And that right there becomes the huge issue in this debate. There's certain people that just don't believe in God. And you know what? Just because you believe in God or don't believe in God, that's your business. But you can't say, in order for people to be involved in religious, civil institutions and discussions, that they have to leave God out of it, because the separation of church and state. Well, God's not just the God of the church. He's involved in all three, and that's the issue. Even if there was a separation of church and state, like some would say, you still can't put God just in the church, because he's the God over all three. So here we are, and that's the debate. But the reality is that the separation of church and state that's chanted at these rallies and all that. I was at an abortion, there was an abortion protest, a movement at a pro-life rally, and they were chanting separation of church and state as to say that we shouldn't be trying to save life because keep your religion in your church. Life is a bigger issue than just the church. A little baby's life is a bigger issue than just the church. How we get along, how we work together is a bigger issue. Our government's a bigger issue. These are larger issues than just what's founded within a church. And so because of that, God's involved in all three. We can't get God out, because if we got God out, we wouldn't even exist. We wouldn't have anything to talk about because we wouldn't be here. Separation of church and state. Interesting discussion. I hope this helps. Thank you.